Oh, yeah, you forget that.
Take your time, take your time. No rush.
Yeah.
Let's see if Joe's logged on yet.
I thought I heard somebody ping in.
Yeah, they heard the ping.
Those you don't,
Okay.
you have to actually steer,
Are you there, Joe?
but a lot of people are going that way.
He says he is.
This thing's supposed to be, it's blue. That's supposed to be blue, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. Joe, are you there?
He muted.
Oh.
Did you mute?
I'm here.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we'll get started here. Don't have any formal opening, but welcome to the May 24th, 2023 Planning Board. I guess you call this a workshop. The workshop will come to order, et cetera. The Lyman Planning Board is holding this workshop to listen, I hope we listen and learn something from Mr. Lee Feldman from Southern Maine Regional Planning Commission.
Actually, it's now Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission.
Sorry,
That's okay.
what he said, that's where he's from.
That's okay.
And the idea here is to just to gather some information about the new law that has been passed by the legislature, which would affect zoning or could affect zoning in our town, particularly with respect to affordable housing and accessory dwelling units and things like that. So what we're trying to do is gather information so that we can determine whether or not a change to our current zoning ordinances is necessary, warranted, how it can be done in the easiest manner. We want to make sure that we follow the state laws, but we have to know exactly, if we can, figure out what we got to do. So that's the whole purpose of having the workshop. Could I please ask, and we have members also from the Ordinance Review Committee. We have the Code Enforcement Officer, a couple of members of the public. So please introduce yourself and let people, the millions of people that are watching us on YouTube and Zoom will be able to know who's here.
I'm Peg McDonald from the Ordinance Review Committee.
Dave Dulon from the Ordinance Review Committee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you just got appointed.
Yeah.
Good. I'm sorry.
Kelly Demers, 10 Partridge Way.
Don Hernan, Planning Board, 33 Murphy's Way.
Cecile Dupuy, 53 Chapel Shores Road.
Lee Feldman, Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission.
We also have Brenda.
Charlotte Code Enforcement.
Don't want to do it, just a citizen.
Thank you.
And I believe Dave Ellis is here, but waiting, he's on the phone right now.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, he comes in. We can.
You're very important to us.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, without further ado, I don't see a lot of people pouring in here, so why don't you take it away, will you, please?
Great. Thank you very much. I heard you say earlier that you were confused. I can tell you that it is very confusing. And some days I am still confused, but I will try to make as much easier for you as I can. This law was passed back in April of 2022. And I can tell you that during its process for review before the governor signed it, and until today, we continuously read it in our office and continuously have questions ourselves. There are nuances about the bill that still are confusing, but I think we have tried to make it as understandable as possible. And try to help towns like yourself get through the process, because it certainly does systemically change zoning in the state of Maine to address affordable housing. So with that, if you've looked at the bill, and I noticed you have the guidance document that the state developed, excuse me, I'm not going to necessarily follow that. But I will send you to certain sections during our conversation. I have my copy right here as well. I'm going to start by indicating that in order to better understand the law, there are three component parts of the legislation. I'm not sure if you've kind of weaned that or not, but there is the accessory dwelling unit standards piece. There is the 2 to 4 housing unit piece. And then there is the affordable housing development piece. And so let's first start with the fact that there are certain standards the towns must meet in order to address both the affordable housing development standard and the 2 to 4 units on a piece of property. Those standards are that you, in order to qualify to put those pieces of the ordinance in place, you have to have I call them the or part of the law.
Mhm.
You have to have a comprehensive plan that is consistent with state law and a growth area identified, which you do not.
Hmm.
This is not a bad thing in this case.
Ah,
Or you need to have some sort of a public water and public sewer system, which you do not,
Right.
which is a good thing in this case. Or you have to meet a designated affordable census tract area that's identified by the federal government, and you do not. I have the map here that identifies those areas in York County and Southern Oxford County where we work. Of the blue areas are those areas that are designated, and Lyman is not.
that's for,
It's for federally designated
Okay.
housing and growth standards that they have. So you don't meet any of the criteria. And in this case, that's a good thing. So let's start backwards from the document and talk about the accessory dwelling units. Because that's probably the most important piece for you.
right.
So accessory dwelling units have to be allowed either in an existing home, attached to an existing home, or could be a standalone structure on the property. Regardless of whether it's, in most cases, either attached to the home or as a standalone structure, you have to meet all of the setback standards that your standards have. So they can't encroach on side yard setbacks, they can't encroach in rear yard setbacks. Where it's going to start getting a little sticky is the issue of septic systems. And I've been dealing with this in Arundel, where I am the town planner for Arundel as a contract for the community. What we started out with there was suggesting, and also in Waterboro, we're dealing with it in Waterboro as well, was suggesting that in order for you to have your accessory dwelling unit, you have to, of course, have a septic system that is sized for the number of bedrooms in your home. That's how the state measures the design criteria, is how many bedrooms are in your home, and they have a certain gallon amount per bedroom. Now, in doing that, we had suggested or have suggested in the past that if someone needs to expand their septic system, that they could expand the septic system to enlarge it to meet the additional bedrooms. We have had conversations with at least one soil scientist who has really pushed for requiring or allowing the accessory dwelling unit to have a separate septic system. But there's nothing in the law that requires that. So if someone has an existing septic system and it's sized for 3 bedrooms and you're adding an accessory dwelling unit with a 4th bedroom, then you could expand your system to do that. Now all you have to put in the law in your ordinance is relevant to that is that the septic system is designed to meet the standards. I'm kind of giving you some nuances here just to explain some of the scenarios that have gone on with that. And the reason that we really started out with having the expansion of a septic system is that there are cases, and we're trying to make sure it does not happen, where someone may have enough land that even though they're doing an accessory dwelling unit, that eventually it could be split from the main property
Right.
and become its own unit.
You mean the accessory dwelling unit could be split?
It could be in the future, unless there's a watchdog making sure that that never happens. So one of the things that we're doing in one of the other communities is we're putting in language that requires that the landowner sign a consent agreement with the town, acknowledging that it is an accessory dwelling unit and that it shall never be split from the main property. And have that recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds.
Would that have to be in the ordinance or would that be?
I would suggest it be in the ordinance if you want to make sure that type of situation does not happen if they're proposing a separate septic system for the ADU. ADUs must be a minimum, excuse me, of 190 square feet in size. The reason for that is the building code. The building code establishes certain sizes of bedrooms, again, and living space. What it does not address is a kitchen area. So there was just a workshop with the legislature on another amendment to this law with the state fire marshal's office, and they discussed this. Really, you got to keep it at a minimum of 190 square feet. And there's several reasons for that. I won't bore you with that, but that's minimum is 190. The other thing that we do with accessory dwelling units is you can set an upper limit. Now, the law does state that if you wanted the accessory unit to be larger than the main unit, you could do that. But I am always of the opinion where it's an accessory dwelling unit, it's smaller than the main unit that's on the property. Many towns are kind of fluctuating in between 600 square feet and 800 square feet for an upper limit on the size of an ADU.
I think ours is 600.
600. And quite honestly, that's a good size. What you don't want, what the purpose of this being in the law was that you don't want it to be a unit where you got 3 kids moving in with a full family. It's more of mom and pop. It may be downsizing from the main house and giving the family the main unit, which is the other thing that we're allowing in one of the ordinances we're writing. It's stating that the property owner must live on the property in either the ADU or the full-size unit.
But that's not a requirement of the law.
No, it is not.
That's in the ordinance you're writing
Yes.
for another town.
Yes. So that's something to consider as well. I think that gives a lot of flexibility. You know, if mom and dad are retired and they want to downsize, they can downsize to a smaller unit on their property and give the property to a family member.
Or they could rent it out.
Or they could rent it out. Absolutely. There's nothing that says they can't do that.
Sounds reasonable.
So that really hits the ADU issue. From my standpoint, you folks probably will have questions. And that's allowed here because, like I said, this can get very confusing. So the second piece of the law is the 2 to 4 unit issue. And to me, this is the most confusing part of the law to really understand. What it was established to do was allow anywhere you allow single family homes that you now must allow minimum of 2 homes on the property. That doesn't mean everybody has to have one, and that doesn't mean that if you want to build your own, single family home on your piece of property that you have to have a second unit, but it's basically allowing that to occur. Yes.
Okay, you said something that quasi contradicts itself and also opens up potential can of worms. You said 2 homes
Yes.
on a unit.
2 homes
not 2 residents, not 2 dwelling units, but 2 homes. Are we talking a duplex type situation, or are we talking two detached single-family residents on the same lot?
Could be either.
That's a big can of worms.
Yep.
Now, if one's smaller and under 600 square feet, is it now a duplex or is it a multifamily?
Don't
Okay,
confuse
why don't we
the,
let him go through the
yeah,
process
don't
here.
confuse the
Then we'll-
ADU issue. This is two full-size, single-family homes.
Bigger than 600 square feet.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. So in doing that, what you can do, there's nothing in the law that says you can't, and we've had many discussions with our attorneys and other folks about it, in fact, the state folks as well, is you have your general purpose zone is a 5-acre zone and your residential zone is a 3-acre zone.
Correct.
You can state that you have to have, in the case of, in your residential zone, 6 acres for your 2 units. They don't have to be 2 units. If someone has 2 acres of land and they come in and say, well, I want my second unit,
Right.
they can't do it if your ordinance is structured so that it says you must have, 3 acres per unit or 5 acres per unit. So you can be somewhat restrictive in that case. Now, here in Lyman, you're not going to have to allow up to 4 units on the property because you don't have the public sewer and water, you don't have the comprehensive plan, and you don't meet the HUD designated, federally designated growth areas.
But we must allow the 2?
Yes,
Yeah, but what you said was you can allow the 2, but you can make sure each one has enough property.
correct.
And our ordinance already says that.
Correct. Yes. So if you're in the 3-acre zone, and someone wants to build a second unit, they got to have the additional 3 acres. So you'd have to have 6 acres of land in order to put the unit. Yep.
So more than one principal unit on the lot.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
nope. So those are the 2 pieces that you folks have to meet as part of your ordinance update. The third part that you don't have to meet is the affordable housing development or density bonus issue. And I'll explain that, but it's something you really don't have to focus in on. And that is basically that if someone wants to come into town and do an affordable housing development, say a series of apartment complexes, usually they're like 12-unit complexes these days, and they want to put up 24 units, 48 units, whatever. They would have to designate so many units to meet the affordable housing standard. And the affordable housing standard is in the law and is defined as under the federal housing and urban development guidelines for affordability. And that would carry into your ordinance if you were going to want to do that for whatever purpose. The other thing it says, though, is in allowing that, the developer then gets 2.5 times the allowed density in your zone.
Wow.
So that they would, be able to almost triple the numbers of units that would be allowed under multifamily housing developments. They would be restricted in the number of parking spaces, or you would be restricted in the number of parking spaces that they could have. So that one unit, if you now currently say you must have 2 parking spaces for every unit, it would actually, in this case, it would drop to 0.66 parking spaces per unit. So that what they're trying to do is limit the number of parking spaces to decrease the impervious surface while increasing the numbers of units allowed.
Doesn't make sense.
Nobody wears it. Yeah, that's right.
I didn't write the law,
Walker's only
but I think
horses.
the intent was to try and that's why you don't have to do it out here. It's more of the
Yeah.
urbanized areas that I think they're really seeking
Right.
to
They
do
want
that.
where you might have an option of public transportation.
Correct.
Which we don't really have here.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
And you mentioned to do it here because of why?
Because you don't meet the criteria that they established under the law. You don't have a comprehensive plan that is consistent with state law and has a growth growth area. I'm sorry, you did miss that part when I started.
So that applies to this part too.
Yes,
Oh.
absolutely, absolutely. That's the most important piece
And you said that they have to designate a certain number
of units.
of units as affordable.
Yes.
Is there a percentage or is there?
Well,
or is
that's
it like 1 out of 25?
well, that's a great question. No, it really is, because in the original law it didn't stipulate. But I can tell you that there's like 3 amendments in the House right now that are trying to make a clearer distinction on what they have to do. And one of them says 51% of the units must be affordable under those standards. I don't know where that's going yet. I think it came out of the Housing Committee divided, which means there was probably a positive vote, but it had some negative votes attached to it.
And you said the affordable housing standard follows the federal standard? Or-
For affordability, for the
For
cost of affordability, yes.
Unless it's a paragraph or more, is that, how is that defined currently?
Yep. Find one of my pieces.
Is it in this?
It is in that document,
Okay.
yes. It's, I believe, if it's a rental unit, it's 80, let's see. For rentals, households with an income at not more than 80% of the area median income for the community, as defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, must be able to afford more than half of the units in the development. That means that the rent and certain other housing expenses will not require more than 30% of the household income. And then if it's a development where you want to have ownership, whether it be a condominium development or you could do an affordable housing subdivision, it's an income at no more than 120% of the area median income. And again, going back to certain housing expenses will not require more than 30% of the household income. It's not for page 6. Page 6.
And you said.
Oh, are you looking at the law?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at, I'm
Okay.
sorry, I have some more of these,
No, that's okay.
but it's the guidance document.
Yep. Page 6 on the guide.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, but we don't have to, we're not a.
You're
we're
not
currently
required to do that.
that.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. It was somewhat debatable at one time because part of the law, and I can pick it out right quick right here, it talks about that the development must be served by a public special district or other centrally managed water system.
Right.
And it says the same for septic systems. Now, water systems, there's not a lot of information. Septic systems, if you talk to DHS and you ask them what one of those are,
Yeah.
they don't have definitions of it. So when they wrote the law, they didn't coordinate it with DHS's septic system subsurface wastewater rules. So it's kind of out there and never land. And we've taken the position that you don't have to meet it.
Well, we don't have, I mean,
Right.
we don't have. it, so.
Exactly. So that's the meat and potatoes of the law. I can try to answer any questions.
Well, let me ask just a general question, okay? Let's make the assumption that the town of Lyman zoning ordinance does not cover this subject very well. We do have some information on ADUs, right? But we don't have all the details that we would supposedly have to, not supposedly, but by the law have to meet as of July 1st.
Yes.
So what happens on July 1st when we have our existing
Yep.
zoning ordinance that's been approved by the voters, and we have the state law that's been approved by the legislature and signed by the governor?
Yep.
Where do we stand with respect to this whole subject?
I don't know.
Oh, God.
The reason I say that is that, excuse me, right now in the legislature, there is a bill that worked its way through the Housing Committee for an extension for communities of less than 10,000 to have 1 year to adopt the regulations, because a lot of small communities were not up to speed or following this or understanding what was happening. That came out of committee divided, as I understand it, and it has not been sent to the floor of the legislature at this time, and it has not been signed by the governor. So I don't know where the extension stands. The other part of that question basically is, or answer to that question basically is that if the clock strikes 12 and you don't have the ordinance in place, this is not like shoreland zoning where a state agency is going to come in and say, we're going to impose this on you. Really, it's up to the town, simply because if somebody comes in and wants to do a development and you don't have anything in place and they choose to spend the money and sue the town, then that's between you and the developer. There is no state carrot and stick associated with
Right.
this law.
So just, I mean, obviously the intention would be to change the zoning ordinance to meet the requirements of the law as soon as possible.
At this point, yeah,
That could take us a while.
it could. I can tell you, I spoke with the staff at Department of Economic and Community Development today. That's where this bill is housed, and that's where the staff is located at DECD. Because they're supposed to be developing a grant program
Yeah.
for organizations like ours to obtain grant monies to help towns develop these ordinances. So the law takes effect technically right now, July 1, and we've been told that the grant money isn't even going to be available till the end of summer. So we're looking again into next year's town meetings if we were to apply for grant money to assist, numbers of towns put their ordinances together. Otherwise, every town basically is either on their own or would work with us, and we would try to, do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible.
Well, maybe it's just, it's going to sound like a self-serving
Nope.
question, but
Nope,
it
it
is.
won't.
What would stop somebody like the planning board in the town of Lyman, for example, asking Southern Maine Regional blah, 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 to help us develop our ordinance?
That's what we're there for.
Ha.
We're here, we serve 39 communities. You're a member of our 39 community center. And what we do is we'll come in and we'll assist you.
It would seem like in some cases, I won't say generic wording, but in some cases you could almost develop generic wording that could be used from, town to town.
Sure.
So that you don't have to develop it on each town do it on its own and maybe get it incorrect in some areas.
Right.
Overkill in other areas or whatever.
So every town, is different. Home rule allowed
Right.
every town to develop their own regulations. So there is some items that need to be tweaked certain ways because of the way the town's regulations work. But I can tell you from the ADU standpoint that that's probably the easiest ordinance. I can, basically say, here you go. I drafted this for another town. We're really close. There you go. You may need to add some definitions to your
Right.
ordinance and whatnot to meet certain aspects of that. But it's when you're getting into the two units on the,
That's a little more complicated.
yeah, there are some nuances that need to be put into your ordinance to make sure that it's very clear what's happening there.
And also would, not to overcomplicate the issue, but would we have some areas in town that are covered by shoreland zoning?
Yes,
How
so
does that affect this also?
great question. I'm not sure that there's actually anything that we need to amend in the shoreline zoning because basically the state law says that the state shoreline zoning regulations shall apply. So even in the case of an accessory dwelling unit, if you've got 400 feet of frontage in the second unit, you need to have 800 feet of frontage in order to be able to accommodate an ADU in the shoreline zone.
Which is not very common, frankly.
Correct,
Not very
correct.
Practical.
And you'd have to meet, you'd have to meet the setback requirements, whether it's, whether you're at 100 feet or 200 feet or 250, whatever your setbacks are from the lakes and ponds, they'd still have to meet that with the ADU. So there's really nothing that we would need to modify shoreline zoning wise to accommodate that.
What about on a non-conforming lot?
Non-conforming lots would be treated the same way they are now if you were to, in the case of the ADUs, where you would be able to put an addition on your house if they were doing an attached ADU, provided it's no closer to the pond, provided that it, is back as far as possible. There are all the certain standards that would have to be met, but that could be accomplished.
I got a question on that. How can you make a non-conforming lot, legally make a non-conforming lot more non-conforming?
How can you make it the lot more
You
non-conforming?
have a legal non-conforming lot of record.
Yep,
Shoreline requires 40,000.
yep,
You have a 0.25 acre lot.
Yep.
With a single-family residential dwelling. Now you have a legal non-conforming lot of record.
because density does not apply to ADUs, and the law says you shall allow. It doesn't say you may allow, it says you shall allow.
So they're violating their own rules by making it more non-conforming.
Well, it's already non-conforming. I mean, I know where you're going with
Yeah.
that, but it's,
Yeah.
to me, I look at it as, it's still non-conforming even after they squeeze a ADU
What-
onto it.
Right.
What you can't do is you can't put it closer to the pond
Right.
than the main
Right.
house. You'd have to put it to the backside, or you could do a standalone ADU as far back as possible, as though someone were putting a garage.
But you can't cover more than 20% of your lot.
Correct, correct.
Okay.
30%.
So
20% here?
20% here, yeah.
Okay. All right. So in your
Okay.
case,
I have
Yeah.
a question about, you mentioned that the state covers shoreline.
yes,
Are they planning on adding something about ADUs on the state?
not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
So it's up to us.
Yes.
I think, yeah, Brenda had a question.
I have a couple of questions.
Shoot.
Subdivisions.
Yes.
We're currently working on a cluster subdivision.
Yes, you are.
Can we make a condition that no ADUs, I mean, we're doing 10 lots, it could end up 20 residents?
That's an interesting question. We've discussed that many times since this law came into effect, as to how to review a subdivision, knowing that the impact could be much greater than having a single family home on it because of the ADU. Every lot could have an ADU.
Especially cluster.
Correct. But again, even with a cluster, the ADU, whether it's attached or it's a standalone, has to meet all of the setbacks. And don't forget that, you're going to have a separate well for the ADU, I would assume, if it's not inside the existing home. You still have to have 100-foot separation between wells and septic systems. So there are some limiting factors that are built into that.
Could we feasibly make that a condition until it gets tested? Would you advise that or no?
I would not advise it, as much as I would like to say, yeah, that would be a great thing. But because the law says you shall, and there's no density requirements or minimum lot sizes for ADUs, if they can meet, but that's also, I'm assuming that would not be the developer doing that. It would be individual homeowners that would choose to do that.
So you said, it looks like one right now is subject to, of the 3 components, really just 2.
Yes, I'd even say 1.5.
1.5.
1.5.
Okay, so you said that, we could permit 2 principal structures on a lot if they meet the density.
Yes,
They meet
6
the
acres,
requirement,
6 acres, 6 acres.
correct.
Can they also have an ADU?
That's a great question. There is nothing in the law that I don't believe that says they can't.
But does there anything that says they can? Could we restrict that, assuming we rewrote?
Now, that's something I might be willing to say we could restrict.
Yeah.
If you're getting the second full unit, then you can't have an ADU. Because there's nothing in the law that says you have to allow that.
Brenda has another question.
So you said that, so if you have a legally existing non-conforming principal structure.
Yep.
The ADU has to meet setbacks.
Yep.
Even if they can't, so if they can't meet setback, I mean, say the principal structure is 5 feet too close to the lot, can the ADU, as long as it's no closer to the edge?
If your ordinance allows that, for example, one town I work with says that, and we've had this discussion, says that if the face of the side yard of the building has an addition on the side yard and it doesn't go any closer and it's non-conforming, then it would be allowed. I don't know what your ordinance says, but that's
How much?
I don't
That's
think so.
one way to do it if you wanted to allow that.
Only
The,
people are
the extension of the house along the face, provided it's no closer.
Really, then ADUs are meant to meet, let me get this right, setbacks but not density.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, and then I think I just had, so if road frontage meets, it has to have 6 acres instead of 3, does it have to have double the road
No,
frontage?
that's not for ADUs, that's for
Yep.
second.
That's-
I'm talking
Yep,
principal
don't confuse the two now.
Principal structure.
There's, I want to say there's nothing in the law that says how that's treated. But I
think we
believe-
require it, right? I think so.
Let me see if I
Oh,
can
road
find something.
frontage, okay.
Quickly, I don't see anything in the law that talks about that.
So that would be based on our ordinance.
Yes.
So if you do have the setbacks and the density for 2 principal structures, and you also can meet criteria to have a couple of ADUs, when you're creating a subdivision, I always thought 3 units created a subdivision.
It does,
That's a good
and it
question.
still does, and the law says that you must meet subdivision regulations.
Oh, gosh.
Oh,
That's going to be
It's pretty much a given, but the law does cover that.
that would be that'd be a good paper, that'd be a lot of paperwork. I know that. I mean, not that we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying each one of those was a subdivision. That could be an issue.
And you mentioned well and septic 100 feet.
Yep.
Where are you getting that?
That's state law with the state plumbing, DHS with the
contradicts-
wastewater and water separation requirements.
That contradicts and goes against FHA, RD, and USDA, 1050 and 75.
That's what the state law says. You must have a 100-foot
State
separation.
law can be more restrictive.
Because this is, well, then because that's 4,000.1 in,
Yeah, our state law requires 100 feet, but it's waiverable to 80.
Correct. But
because
you really don't promote that.
No,
Yeah.
unless you don't have the room.
Right, exactly. You can get waivers.
Yes.
Yes.
And lately they're not giving waivers.
No,
They want the casing.
correct.
Okay, so you've given us a pretty good overview. There's been some questions. We had some additional people show up, also ordinance review committee members and select board members.
Yep.
And I think Joe Wagner, aren't you on the phone? Aren't you on the Zoom? Or if the Joe? Joe? Joe got away?
He's there.
All right, well,
He's muted.
He's muted.
okay, I'm not muted, but that's okay. Anyway, so we have some other people listening.
Yep.
I mean, my personal, as a member of the planning board, I hope the other guys agree with me, but my goal, I think our goal is we want to have something that we can hang our hat on, because if somebody comes in with an application for this, that, or the other thing, and it's not specifically covered in our ordinance, then, what do we do?
That's another great question that I really don't have an answer to.
State law applies.
Joe's here.
Joe's like,
Yes, I'm sorry. State law would supersede.
Well, yes, I would agree with you in the fact that state law would supersede because it says you shall. But if your ordinances do not provide the performance standards that you need to have, I'm not sure where we go
Mhm.
from there. That has yet to be tested. And I don't believe that that question has been asked or answered by DECD staff.
Yeah, I'm not saying we shouldn't follow state law, I don't, not at all, but I'm just saying that
Yeah.
our ordinance is going to would take time to change, even if everyone agreed, planning board agreed, the ordinance review committee agreed, and select board agreed to change an ordinance, it would still take time for it to go to the voters. In our case, because of our new charter, it would not go to the voters until November of 2024.
Okay.
So in the interim, that's assuming everybody agreed and all the wording was proper, et cetera, as far
Right.
as the groups thought.
Right.
Then what do we do between now and, for example, November of 2024, when this can go to the voters to vote on?
I would certainly have that conversation with your town attorney.
Okay.
I don't want to play attorney.
No,
in
I
that
get you.
case.
I get you. No, I agree.
Yeah.
So
I mean-
there was no provisions, if you go on the premise of state law is more restrictive, there was no provisions that you're aware of that's part of LD 2003 that will allow towns to enact changes necessary to accommodate LD 2003 sooner than what their current policies are.
So, yeah, so I'm not sure you were here. We covered that early on, but state law basically says you must have this enacted by July 1 of 23. And the problem is that there's been a couple of amendments put into the legislature for extending that. And it's come out of committee as a divided vote, as I understand it. So, and it has not made the floor of the legislature yet, or signed by the governor. So I just don't know where that stands.
So that would be the only provision is if that were passed.
Correct.
Gives people time. But
Yeah.
in our case, I don't know if that's still enough time.
No, it's not enough.
Yeah, because we have to go 2 years now.
But Brenda, you had a question?
That was the reason why I asked.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say, can you have an emergency
Well, that's,
You can, yes.
town meeting
Yeah.
if you needed to?
I think, well, I don't know, we talked about that.
Anyway, I didn't mean to get into the weeds there, but
Sure.
it's Brenda, you had a question you wanted to ask?
Well, I guess, so July 1.
Yep.
If someone comes in to apply for something that they know under the new law is allowed, I know that under our ordinance, it isn't allowed. Should I get a directive from the Board of Selectmen, which way they want me to lean? It shouldn't be my decision.
I would say I would suggest that the Board of Selectmen actually get a directive from your town attorney.
As he already said, okay, our ordinance, it covers it. Our ordinance can be more restrictive than the state ordinance. And he's already addressed that. I mean, you've already said that, okay, we've got, for instance, you
Mhm.
want to put an ADU in
Yes.
Lyman,
Yes,
it can't be bigger than 600 square feet. It's already in the ordinance.
correct. But,
It already
And the
says
state
in the
says that.
ordinance that the owner has to occupy the property.
and
So
that's fine.
already there.
Yes, that's all
So
fine.
That's actually more restrictive than the state's ordinance,
No,
and it's a lot. Well, okay,
No.
it's,
and the reason I say no is because the state law does not establish an upper limit of
okay.
an ADU. It only
So-
establishes the minimum
Minimum.
lot size.
Our ordinance says ADU on a conforming lot.
This
The
is
state is saying on any lot.
on any lot where residential development is allowed.
So I guess that would be my caveat.
The other piece of that, and I really haven't talked about it, although I think it's a minor issue, is you cannot require additional parking spaces for ADUs.
I don't know that's
yeah, that's not a.
Yeah.
not a big
I,
issue.
yeah,
Okay, but I'm just trying to say, practically speaking,
sure.
what course of action should we take? I mean, it sounds like step one, if we're being halfway intelligent, we would, shall we say, copy or utilize with your services, hopefully, ordinances that you're developing for other towns that would be applicable to our town, and then try to get our hands around the wording that we want to push forward.
Sure.
And then we have the ordinance review committee, they should be involved, and then the select board should be kept informed, obviously.
Yep.
But, I mean, that's a positive approach, but then July 1st, I think sounds like we should go to the town attorney and get a readout as to what action should be taken. Because I don't know if you'll get a challenge or not, we'll get a challenge, but it's certainly possible. And the planning board should not be deciding this. It should be decided with the assistance of the town attorney in accordance with state laws and our zoning ordinance.
Can I just ask
Sure.
who you use for legal services?
Brad Moran,
Okay.
I'm not sure the name of his law firm, but whatever.
Yeah,
Pretty Clay, isn't it?
okay.
But I think what we need to do is, we have to look at what our existing ordinance says. I think you're gonna find that our existing zoning ordinance covers most of what we just talked about.
It does, but there's some exceptions. There's some
To me,
exceptions.
If we already cover it, Brenda just follows our ordinance. If somebody doesn't like it, they can take us to court. But our ordinance says so.
Other than the requirement that it be not a conforming lot.
Right, and that's,
That's my
Yeah.
biggest.
Sure.
and the state law says that if a building is allowed, then
I mean-
an ADU is allowed, and the way I see it is, I don't know how we fight that.
As long as they, under the law, as long as they meet setback and
They
meet
gotta meet
setbacks.
setbacks.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's the issue.
In septic.
Setbacks.
That's right.
In septic.
Okay,
Yep.
well, I don't think we should try to solve that here. I think the goal is to get information.
Yep.
And then develop some questions that we should send to the town attorney and ask the town attorney to help us resolve. So that we have, by July 1st, if possible, there's a standard to go by. So we don't want to put the code enforcement officer in a position of saying yes or no on something that she doesn't have something to back her up on. Same thing with the planning board. The planning board should have something to back itself up on. And I would suggest the select board should too. You don't want to jump into this thing. So,
Lee J.
Yes.
What's the next step for our ordinance review committee to contact you and set up a meeting as soon as possible so that maybe we can review your boilerplate, or whatever you want to call it?
Well, either that or I can just send you a copy.
Yeah, that would be preferable.
And then you can
just
move
send
it
us-
on.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've done,
You send it to Brenda, and she can
Excuse
send
me.
it to us.
send it to Julie.
Julie.
Or Julie, send it
Yep.
to
Julie
Julie.
doesn't let Brenda touch anything.
We follow the system.
so I've drafted amendments for several towns and I can
Good.
get you a couple of different
Yeah, that would be a big help.
looks.
Yep.
Yeah. That's easy.
What other, I don't know what time it is, but 6:20. Okay, what other questions do we have that are of a general nature here that Lee J could help us with?
Does Joe have any questions?
I mean, specific questions. Joe, do you have questions you'd like to ask?
Actually, I'm quite in agreement with Dave Ulon. Looking at the 10.6, I think we pretty much cover most of the requirements of LD 2003, with the exception of 10.6.3. I think we'll have to adjust that a little bit to allow detached ADUs, because I don't think that's specified there. I contacted the committee clerk for housing today, asking about the status of 1706.
Mhm.
And as Mr. Feldman mentioned, that it was a divided report. The language is not yet available. The committee attorney is going over that right now. It will then be sent to the revisor's office, and then it will be sent to the full House and Senate for consideration. I don't know if there's an emergency requirement attached to that, but I would not count on that being approved anytime soon.
That was the one that extended it, Joe?
I don't know if that was included in there because it was, what was approved by 9 of the members, actually 11 of the members, was an amended version of 1706, but I don't know exactly what amendments they had placed on there. Again, there are 3 versions. 9 of the members voted for one
Jeez.
amended version, one for another, one for another. So
Six.
that's still, the language itself is still in the works, as far as I know.
Okay.
So, yeah, because that was definitely part of the conversation for tonight was 1706. And I might suggest, and I'm quickly looking forward to my pile of paperwork here. I'm not as concerned about 1706 as I am I can find it. Yeah, so here's 1706, which basically was just some clarifying language.
Okay.
Excuse me, to the ADU issue, but more importantly, I don't know if I can find it. There was another piece of legislation, I want to say it was 1692. There's like 15 amendments
Oh,
to
boy.
this law that are sitting out there that housing has been dealing with. One of them, excuse me, that's 214. I'll have to get the numbers, but one of them was a recommendation to have a certain number of pre-approved buildings established statewide so that if someone wanted to come in for an ADU, they could say this is a pre-approved under the law
Oh.
and just get a building permit. They wouldn't need to go through review process at the local level because some towns would go through a full code review.
Right.
This law was going to have some pre-approved footprints
Oh.
and buildings so that people could basically like go on a Hancock Lumber or one of the other lumber places and buying
Just buy a
buildings.
Set of plans, that approved set of plans.
Right, exactly. So there's that bill that's sitting out there, but then there's another bill, and I want to say it was 1692, that was going to establish a statewide planning board, basically, that would review affordable housing development projects and bypass the local planning process. And I'm not sure what the
Why not? Why not?
I'm not sure what the status of that bill is, but that was presented to the housing committee
Oh, boy.
2 weeks ago, probably.
Make sure the members are from Aroostook, Penobscot, Somerset.
Well, but those are, that's unfortunately, that's more conjecture
Yes,
at this time.
yes. Yeah, there are a
Unfortunately.
number of amendments out there, and that's the other thing that we've discussed in our office is how to handle it, because you have LD 2003, which is what we all have learned over the last 9 months as to how do we get that incorporated. Now you've got numerous amendments that could flip flop the whole law. So
Gotcha.
yeah,
And this is for Brenda. I just noticed, and this is on page 8 of the Maine Municipal Services, Legal Services. If an ADU is located in a shoreline zone, it must comply with the minimum shoreline zoning requirements, which
Yeah.
would be a 40,000 square foot lot.
And another 200 feet of shorefront.
Along, yeah.
That goes against what 2003 says.
no,
No.
it says you must meet shoreline zoning requirements.
So,
Well, what you just asked a question about about non-conforming lots, didn't you?
right, and I thought you said density doesn't count for ADUs.
It does not.
Well, density, I think you're talking about density as how many acres per lot or how many, not what the lot coverage is. We have a lot coverage
Let's-
requirement also.
Let's separate it from the standpoint of, if I want to put an ADU in my backyard and I'm not in the shoreline zone, density does not come into play.
Right.
If I'm in the shoreline zone, it says shoreline zoning you must comply with shoreline zoning. In the shoreline zone, you have to meet all of those standards.
So it's pretty much impossible to do an ADU in shoreline.
Well, if you have a big enough lot, you can.
And enough shorefront.
Well, that's in this township. Most of our lots are not.
Well, that's what we're concerned with, is this town.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is that if it's a non-conforming lot and it's not big enough, it doesn't meet the requirements, then it can't have the ADU on it.
Well, you'd have to treat it the same way you treat non-conforming lots in the shoreline zone, whatever that may be.
Well, now what do you mean by that? A non-conforming lot in the shoreline zone is if it's smaller, if it's a pre-existing lot,
Yep.
or, I don't know, 76 is the number, I don't know. what the number is.
Yeah,
If it's a pre-existing lot and it doesn't meet the 400 feet of 200 feet, I think, 200 feet, 4,000,
Frontage,
40,000 square foot requirement, then it's a non-conforming lot.
Correct.
So if I can permit. a
Now,
residence-
you can have your standard dwelling
John.
and an ADU on that lot?
Hey, Dave, let Brenda
Yeah, I know,
answer.
but I'm asking her question.
And that's what I want to know.
Yeah.
I would really need to review your
Yeah,
shoreline
I
zoning
think we're-
language.
Yeah.
If I can permit a residence on the lot because it was a legally existing non-conforming lot, it meets the setback, 75 feet from the water,
Yeah.
20 feet from each side.
Yeah,
They can have an ADU in the basement.
in the basement? I don't want to get into building code issues, but
Well,
I,
yeah.
They have
Yeah.
all the interest
Egress
standards.
and everything
That's
else.
right, exactly.
Or an accessory, I mean, if they have a garage on the back, they can put one up over the garage. If I can permit a residence, I
Yeah.
can permit an ADU.
New construction.
New cons- No.
I'm more concerned about if you're putting the ADU in the existing house. To me, that's not as big of an issue as if you're going to put an expansion on the structure.
But if they're expanding outside of the 75,
Right?
and they're not exceeding the 20% lot.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
And what Kelly said, undid all of that.
Yeah.
Which is right
But-
here in there.
But they are limited to that 30% expansion.
Only in.
Correct.
Lifetime.
If it's,
Correct.
I don't think an ADU should be part of the 30% expansion. Myself. I mean, the ADU needs to be outside of 75.
most of those places are gonna hit the 20% before they get into that.
Yes, they are.
Okay. All right, what other questions do we have for Mr. Feldman? There may be, I mean, it sounds like we need some help here. We need some help from the lawyer.
A lot of.
Um,
Just a quick question. So we said for a detached ADU, there would have to be another septic system, and that would have to comply with
No,
the.
they have to be large enough.
You could, the ordinance, when you draft your local ordinance, well, you already have one. If you want to change it, you can. Again, one town that have dealt with, actually, they had their soil scientists, because they wanted to put in an ADU, soil scientists make the argument to the town that they needed to have a separate septic system for the ADU, that they can't expand the existing septic system,
Right.
which is not the case.
Yeah, that's not right.
So you're in a situation where you need to make a policy decision for your ordinances. Do we want to allow someone to expand their septic system for the additional
If they can.
bedroom? Or, yeah, if they can. Or do we just flat out want them to have a separate septic system for the ADU?
And now could they make that apply whether it's attached or not, or detached?
Sure,
Because I mean, at the end of the day, they're all designed for a certain number of occupants.
exactly.
You're gonna add an occupant or occupants.
Yep.
So you either expand the one you have, which would be the cheapest option,
Of course.
and probably the most likely to be conforming.
Yep.
Or if you can't, then you have to have a separate one. Now you gotta be 200 feet. And,
Yes.
right.
Yes, and what I did with this other town was, I won't get into the details of the issue, but we wrote into the ordinance that if you're going to have a separate septic system, and it's in this case, it was a standalone EDU, that you have to sign a consent agreement with the town, record it in the registry of deeds, indicating that that will never be split into a separate lot. And I also built in that it cannot, you got to think of all these things when you're doing stuff like that. You cannot create an HOA or a condominium association.
Oh.
Because you could have two units on the same lot, one being an ADU, create a condominium association and allow separate ownership. And what we're trying to not
So that's a
allow,
loophole.
yeah,
Yeah,
what we're trying to not allow is separate ownership.
right.
We're saying if it's an ADU, it's an ADU.
It's an in-law apartment.
Correct.
whatever you wanna call it. Yeah,
Exactly.
Same family.
Do we have any other, some of you guys, John, Dave, do you have any questions?
Try and absorb.
Any questions? I mean, you know, I'm just interested in what the path forward is for our zoning ordinance, because that's, I mean, the planning board's supposed to follow the zoning ordinance. And then and I think Brenda wants direction,
Yeah.
which, so that we have something to hang our hat on. We don't get, I mean, the towns could still get sued by someone if that was possible, if they wanted to, but
Yeah,
and anyhow, we just want to make sure we have a path forward to try to make this thing work, because it's not going to happen before July 1st. There's no way we can change our ordinance before then.
right. I mean,
But I think we should start working on it. That's my point.
yeah, and quite honestly, I mean, I'm not sure that, don't take it the wrong way, folks, but I'm not sure Lyman is a hotbed where someone's going to come in here and test it and try to file a suit. You know, I see that happening in some other communities, maybe a coastal community, maybe one of the bigger communities. But we're far enough inland, we're a small enough community here that, if you're just trying to do the right thing.
Right. But even so, we still need
Of course.
a path towards getting our ordinance
Of course.
in alignment with state law.
Oh, yeah, I would never say no to that.
Yeah.
Put
So
a
I mean, that,
moratorium coming to life.
No, we're not.
Probably not.
maybe we're not, but
Probably
even
not.
so,
I think the path forward, Don, it sounds like, is we have some tweaks to do.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have some examples to save us a lot of time and energy
Mhm.
to go by.
Right.
And then that's, because all we have to do is, we want the language we have to present to the public and get voted on as quickly as possible. And that's the ultimate goal. And that's the direction. And then in the meantime, if somebody does come in and wants to sue the town, there's a lawyer, let the lawyers fight it out, you know?
Does anyone know if we have any campgrounds with cottages, like little cabins that are being rented? Because when you brought up the condominium idea, that reminded me of a couple places in New Hampshire where they had former campgrounds that were sold, and now they have converted them into lakefront condominiums, and you have your 260 square foot.
Well, when you say cottages, I'm just gonna bring up an example.
Yeah, please.
It's come up in recent meetings. What about MX207? They classify themselves as a campground, don't they?
Yep.
And those are trailers. that
Yeah.
Are, I know they're mobile, but.
They come in, we discussed that, they come under
Yeah,
a
I mean,
separate,
it's probably separate, but I'm just saying.
Separate
yeah,
issue.
but it's a good question. It is.
It's event camping, they fall under the definition of event camping,
that they're trying
5 days or less.
Yeah.
So the question you had though, those are not accessory dwelling units, because an accessory dwelling unit has to be accessory to a primary use.
Which was the original clubhouse, which has been converted.
I wouldn't, no, that's not a straight
That's
face
probably
test to
true.
me.
It's gotta be
That-
owner occupied.
but-
Same owner occupy all of them.
But what you're looking at and dealing with is a whole other issue of the tiny home issue,
Mm-hmm.
which some people have somehow gotten mixed into the ADU issue because, I don't want to muddy the waters for you, because some people may want to purchase a tiny home and have it brought in to be used as an ADU. But on the surface, tiny homes is a whole other issue.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that other, I forget the number you mentioned that's gonna be on the floor.
Yep.
Where somebody can go get a pre-approved ADU, that could fit into that.
Very well
I
could.
I said, I'll build you a approved ADU.
It very
It
well
used to
could.
be called a tiny home, now it's called an approved ADU,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done in again, one community that was concerned about ADU, concerned about tiny homes, because they are many of them are on chassis. And there is a taxation issue where if they're there for 179 days, they don't get taxed. But if they're there for 181 days, they get taxed. And so what we did in that community is say tiny homes must be on a frost wall or a full foundation and must be connected to the town sewer and water system.
If you
So,
don't have a town to.
yeah, you don't, but you can still require a frost wall, full foundation
Yeah, that was-
So in
situation.
other words, you're not gonna get stuff to your F-150. haul it off on day
Exactly.
179 or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Or you make an ordinance that stipulates that they cannot be used as a primary residence, cannot have youth enrolled in schools, basically cannot be a burden on municipal goods and services.
You
I-
probably would end up I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I was gonna say, I wouldn't push that type of an issue.
No.
I don't see any reason why it'd be any different than I wanna go get a mobile home and stick it on a property. This may not be on a frost wall per se,
Right.
but I'm taking the wheels off and I'm putting the skirt around it. It's not like I can just,
Well, one of the things that would address is short-term rentals, which short-term rentals are coming, and they are here in Lyman. They are very prominent in southern Maine.
So
And-
that raises another issue.
Oh, come on.
I wouldn't go down I wouldn't worry about that. Well, with the whole tiny home issue, yes, it's there. Don't think that people won't put an ADU on their property and want it as a short-term rental.
Oh, I know. I see it.
So that's the other thing we've built into some of the ordinances,
We
that
should
they
get
shall
that
not be
too.
used as short-term rentals.
So that's something we need to address in our zoning.
Well, that's the issue.
put it on the water, you know?
You can, I mean, you can also just establish what's the word I'm looking for? Establish a form for people a registration form, and say, I'm gonna use my ADU as a short-term rental.
And we definitely need an ordinance that addresses short-term.
Yes.
Which, by the way, keep this in mind, Brenda. One of the primary targets for that market, by the way, is traveling nurses. Because they're per diem, they have a contract, and, you know, they may renew their contract, or they may not, they may take off and go someplace else, but they'll be back.
It's true.
And you can't find enough housing for them right now, because they need nurses,
I'm dealing with that right now.
so. Keep that in mind.
Okay, this is the workshop now.
Yep.
We sort of worked this into the ground a little bit. Maybe we're into the weeds a little bit, maybe not. But as far as, is there anything else that you want to cover with us? I mean, it sounds like we definitely want to use your services.
Sure.
And sounds like we may want to go to the town lawyer to get some guidance. And the ordinance review committee has got a whole bunch of stuff they're going to talk about at your next meeting, whenever that is. But
Well, I think, we're gonna talk, we have other work to do anyways, that we've already started, but I mean, when it comes to that, he's gonna get us some copies.
okay. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. I'm just trying to say, okay, as far as this workshop here, is there anything, trying to stay on topic here, to comply with the new law? What else should we be talking about here? We covered this. It sounds like we have a little bit of action items here, going to the town lawyer and also asking Southern Maine to help us. Is there anything else that we need to do here? Not that I don't want to let people stay here and talk all night, but Joe, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much, Mr. Belton, for everything.
You're very welcome.
I would say thank you also. Did you have anything else you want to say in closing, or?
No, I mean,
I don't
I
mean to
think we've
rush you.
covered a lot of the detail information in here. And again, you know, I'm SMPDC and myself are here to help serve you folks as any way we can. That's what we exist for.
Well, you've been very helpful. I would say we've had some assistance on a subdivision here
Yes,
recently.
yes.
Very helpful with that.
Yep,
So,
I've been in
we
the background on that, but
we appreciate that.
Hannah has helped a
Hannah.
lot with you.
It's been very helpful to
Yep.
us. But I don't want to belabor the issue or your time. I'm just saying, I think we've got enough to go on. Does anybody else have any final questions they want to throw in the mix here? I know some of you guys like to stay here and talk all night, but I have a libation waiting for me at home. So I'm going to go see if that's still there. So,
Thank you.
any other thing?
You're very
else?
welcome.
Okay,
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and close the workshop now, please, at
6:41.
6:41. Thank you very much for coming.
You're very welcome.
Kill the.
Thank you.
Night, Joe.
We're still live, so.
I know. I'm on my best behavior. I'm trying to be.
So which brokerage are you with?
Be good.